the entire Berkeley Alumni Association, which is 500,000 strong, by the way. She is registered and supposed to join us, I think, as well. And I know that Vincent Wang, which is president of the APAPA, Ohio, which is, as I said, a national organization for Asian Americans in public affairs. He actually also have been a major supporter of that. But that being said, I want to get started, and I want to turn the time over to my wonderful co-host and moderator, Terry. Terry, please.
Thank you so much, Chuck, and welcome to everybody. My name is Terry Wong. I'm a writer and the chair of community partnerships for APAPA, Ohio. I'll be your moderator today, and we welcome you to the first annual June 19th Dialogues, Stories and Histories from the Black and Asian Communities. Today, obviously, is June 19th, 2021. Many of you today are celebrating Juneteenth, which became a national holiday just this year. So we're so happy for that. On Juneteenth actually commemorates June 19th, 1865, in which the Union forces announced the end of fighting in Texas. And this was 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. June 19th, 1982, many years later, is the day that the Chinese American and Asian American community remember the murder of Vincent Chin, a Chinese American man in Detroit, Michigan. So obviously these days, do they represent a coincidence just of history or something more? And through this dialogue, we hope to answer these questions and a few broad ones about the relationship, for example, between personal and social history. And how do we combine these two realms of knowledge to find unity and paths forward together as Asian and Black Americans and other Americans? So thank you again for your participation. We will have a Q&A and a breakout session towards the end, so we welcome your full participation in this dialogue. So I would like now for every speaker to introduce yourself, and we're going to do a little icebreaker. John, if you can put up the nonviolent communication values. We are going to pick 3 values that drive us as human beings and for social justice in our lives and purpose. And I feel this is a great way for all of us to understand each other and also to see how we're related to each other. And in the end that we are fighting, we are definitely more unified than we are sometimes led to believe. So I'm going to start out, and I will be picking my 3 values are beauty, autonomy, and tenderness. I believe even in acts of social justice, that beauty and art can be transformative components of how we pursue justice. And even when we are faced with obstacles and people who may disagree, I still believe adamantly that we must give each other autonomy and independence, and also show love, tenderness, and kindness to each other. So those are my 3 values, and I turn it over to our speakers now. Thank you. And please feel free to name your values, pick as many as you want, and put it in our chat box so we can understand each other better. Thank you.
Absolutely. And really, we do hope that all of you guys can share your own values, the things that really that resonate with you. So for myself, as I said, I'm Chuck. I'm the president of BCIA, but myself, I'm an entrepreneur as well as an investor in the technology sector. And being someone who is actually sort of entrepreneurial, I always think that whatever we do, there needs to be a purpose. So purpose really resonates well with me. And as a leader, we need to be effective. We need to be effective in what we do. We need to be effective in making changes and positive changes, and impacts and whatnot. So effectiveness is another value that resonates well with me. And then lastly is whatever we do, and whether it's a company, whether it's a nonprofit, it's really that sense of community. So really building a sense of community is actually very important. So those are the 3 things: purpose, effectiveness, and community. Those are really resonate well with me. So Wayman. Women, are you on mute?
I'm sorry.
Okay, there you go.
For me, the three values are cultural empathy, unity, and self-determination. My name is Banks, and I like to begin with a quote from John Ubiti. He talks about, "I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am." And this encapsulates my personal and professional history at Berkeley. It acknowledges for me the fact that without the support of others, especially staff, students, and faculties of the philosophy department, the Athletic Studies Center, and the Alumni Association, and the university in general, I would not be here today. I was born in West Philadelphia, and I am what you call formerly incarcerated or justice-involved veteran, Navy veteran, with an undergraduate degree from the University of California, Berkeley. I piloted the first cross-enrollment program with dedicated academic support for justice-involved individuals and veterans in order to demystify Cal by experiencing Cal. I currently do the same for Berkeley Underground Scholars t-shirt and the Cal's philosophy department. And I also tutor Cal's athletes in philosophy. Thank you. So my three values are, again, cultural empathy, unity, and self-determination.
Kareem, we'll put you next.
Yes. So my name's Kareem Hinton. I'm one of the three co-founders of Black Lives Matter Cleveland. And I guess the three qualities that I would like to speak on or mention that I identify with and place importance to are effectiveness, empathy, and health. And effectiveness is important in everything that we do because we don't need to be doing things that are hollow. We need to be effective in what we do, whether it's our activism, whether it's in trying to convey a message or accomplish a specific task. I think too many things are done that are very hollow, which, you know, as we talk about Juneteenth, that is the fear that is on the horizon for a lot of people, that this Juneteenth, this might actually be a hollow gesture when we see our government actually make this a holiday, but that they might stop short there. The other two are empathy and health. And with empathy, it's a no-brainer. It's what's bringing us here together today. You know, we have a shared empathy with and for one another. And we want to learn more. We identify with one another with much of the hate and the violence that's being perpetrated against our shared in both our communities. This is why we're here. And I want to just continue this on. And then lastly, health. And I think our good health, whether it's mental or physical, that's something that we have not always had the luxury to take care of. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to thrive and be able to take care of these things because our actual existence is an act of defiance to those that are actually really fighting against us. And I guess later on in this, I'd like to be able to just expound upon, you know, why I'm here, how I'm compelled onto this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kareem. And we've have a few more people that have entered the conversation, so welcome. What we're doing right now is just introducing the speakers and sharing with each other our universal values. We welcome you to participate. Charleston, I think you're on mute still. Your microphone.
Now we're on.
There we go.
Right.
There we go.
Thank you. Recording on the record. my name is Charleston Wong, and just start off with my 3 values. It is very classical, traditional. My 3 values are faith, or what we can say also trust, and the next one is hope, and the final one is charity, which we also can call love. And these 3 values are terminal values or end values. Our process values towards the end value. The end value is community, which is 2 words, common unity. At this juncture of our history, this nation and our various communities or neighborhoods are in dire need of common unity, given the divisive rhetoric that has plagued us for at least 4 years before us today. And professionally, I'm an attorney. I graduated and passed the bar in Ohio in 1982. That is the exact same year when Vincent Chin was murdered in the streets of Detroit. And my role, hands-on role in the Vincent Chin story is in 1987, when the second civil rights trial, second federal civil rights trial, the United States government brought charges against the killer for depriving Vincent Chin of his civil rights to enjoy a public accommodation at that time. That is old civil rights law. He was in a bar and in an adult entertainment bar, and he was confronted by 2 white men and ultimately killed by the father, the older man, with a baseball bat. And in '87, the trial came to Cincinnati. I was involved in organizing our community here to get ready for the second trial. We did press releases. We wrote op-ed articles. We organized the community across the board, all peoples, and we did a court watch. We sent people to watch the trial, and also we did candlelight faith prayers at various faith institutions, religious institutions. People are praying for a good outcome. And I'm happy to share with you my living memories, to relive this painful episode with you today, as I know it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charleston. Welcome to everybody here. Before I pass it to Professor Malia McAndrew, I do want to share some values from our participants. Thank you, Kavana. His values are connection, communication, tenderness, and self-knowledge. We can see a lot of overlap already. And also Marifel, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, belonging, purpose, and joy. Lashana says that she says so many important values on this list, but I have chosen power, empathy, and creativity. And thank you to Kathy. She has chosen nurturing, respect, and health like Kareem. So thank you so much. We can see how through these values that we are so connected and can work together through understanding. So I'm going to pass it to Professor Malia McAndrew, and she'll introduce herself, and she will also give us her historical kind of overview of these 2 events, Juneteenth and the murder of Vincent Chin. Professor McAndrew.
Thank you so much, Terry. My name is Malia McAndrew. I'm an associate professor of history at John Carroll University in suburban Cleveland, Ohio. I'd have to say that my 3 things that I really value are creativity, discovery, and learning. And learning is part of the reason why I'm here today. I'm here to listen and to learn from all of you. I think my own background as a historian, as a person who reads and thinks a lot about our nation's past, I'll offer a few brief reflections on this, but then I'd really like to know what this history means for everybody today and where we want to go forward as a future and as a people. People often say that, the things that we're interested in history, we're interested in them because we're trying to work things out in our own society today. And so I'd like us in thinking about these 2 events, these 2 June 19 events, is to think about and reflect about on what does freedom mean? What does freedom mean to us today? What has freedom meant to people in the past. Juneteenth, as all of you now know, is our newest national holiday, and it's a day of celebration. It helps us to mark the meaning of freedom. And so I would say that Juneteenth is less about Gordon Granger. It's less about the Union Army arriving and making a pronouncement that slavery was over. And it's more about a celebration of freedom, right? And a hope for the world to come. And one of the things historically that that those free people who came out of America's peculiar institution wanted to do very early was to secure greater rights. As many historians have said, the days after slavery brought freedom, but they brought little else. So many people whose labor had been used to make America an incredibly wealthy country were given nothing but freedom, right? No land, no food, no shelter, no tools, no real way to get ahead in the United States. And so what it took was an interracial coalition of activists during this time period, right after the Civil War, who had the goal to change America, to fundamentally change America, and to create the world's first functioning interracial democracy in the United States. And so as we can see, this remained much more of an aspiration than a reality during their time period. But it's something that continuous generations of Americans have continued to build upon. Terry, I can say a lot more about history, but I don't know how much time you want me to talk.
Well, I think that's a great overview. One thing in both of us talking about this that people don't realize, that maybe if you can talk about the which slaves were freed and how they, eventually what most of us realized, it was the 13th Amendment that actually ended the institution of slavery. So what is the importance of Juneteenth, right? Why not celebrate the 13th Amendment, right? So maybe if you can just tell us the very long journey to the 13th Amendment, very briefly.
Yeah, well, the first thing that I would say is to remember that laws and proclamations are simply things that are proclaimed. They are not things that are realized. So if we want to talk about how does slavery end for any individual, it ended in a lot of different ways. So if you take somebody like Frederick Douglass freed himself, right? He escaped to the North, right? And so he and others like him helped to create a legal framework that would ensure freedom, not just for themselves, but to actually end the institution of slavery. So when Gordon Granger came to Texas and he announced that slavery was over in Texas, okay, yes, it was over for those people in that place, but what is to say that slavery wouldn't, or unfree labor wouldn't re-pop itself up in America? And in fact, many of the people who were slaveholders in the South were thinking about and wanted to bring in other forms of unfree labor from places like Asia to now work in these places. So it was really the creation of what they call the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment, that guaranteed constitutionally freedom, citizenship, and the right to vote to all persons who were both born in the United States and naturalized as U.S. citizens. And so that's where I'll bring in, and we can talk more later, because I just really want to be brief so that I can hear from other people. But at the same time these ideals were being debated about freedom in the African American community, there's also a great debate going around about the status of Asian immigrants to the United States as well. And it's something that activist leaders like Frederick Douglass really pushed upon. You see, the first Asian immigrants to the United States come before the Civil War, come around the time of the gold mines, work in railroads, work in factories. Also, a lot of people aren't aware, work in helping to create cigars, clothing, shoes. Another thing that many Americans aren't aware of is that many single women came to the United States from China. They were promised things like marriages. They were promised jobs, and in fact many of them were kidnapped and were forced into sexual slavery in the United States. And so that's a part of our nation's history that is virtually unknown and that many Americans don't talk about today. So when we talk about what freedom means, we're talking about it for a broad swath of Americans. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Malia. I think that for that history, you know, I think we think of history sometimes as a list of dates and list of facts, but there's a purpose to how, and I always like to point out that history is studied backwards, right? But we experience it forward. So how as a community are we experiencing, we're living through history right now, and we don't need, you know, dramatic political kind of events to tell us that, right? This is our lives. So thank you so much for that. And we'll come back to you to get your views about the Vincent Chin case, but we're gonna move on to our speaker. So Raymond, Malia spoke so much about freedom. That word came up so often, not in dealing with Juneteenth, but the greater kind of society and the type of society we wanna build in America. I want to like to know, what is freedom mean to you as a Black man living in America?
I don't know as a Black man, but as a human being, more fundamentally, freedom for me has been fighting mass incarceration. As I mentioned before, I'm justice involved or formerly incarcerated, and the cycle of recidivism kept me in the system for about 8 years. And one of the reasons that I promote education for those who've been in the system and veterans is because it allows you to escape the system, and it's shown to reduce recidivism by as much as 84%. Before I go any further, I really want to highlight and acknowledge the efforts and leadership of Azadeh Zarabi, who's in charge of the Berkeley Underground Scholars Program, and members of the philosophy department for creating this cross-enrollment program where it gives formerly incarcerated people or justice-involved people the opportunity to attend Cal, and they pay for the tuition and fees and provide dedicated academic support. And so freedom for me is the creation of programs that provide access and create inclusion. I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 55, and so I've seen considerable changes. And I agree with Michelle Alexander that the incarceration system is the new Jim Crow because it deprives people of rights. And you mentioned as a Black man, but it also deprives rights of Asian men. And one of the programs that they have with the Berkeley Underground Scholars is the Asian Prison Support Committee. So those of you that are local in the Bay Area, you might want to follow up on that. So for me, ending recidivism is the way I fight for freedom in the current day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we see in Raymond's story this inevitable merging of the personal and the societal, and people that are experiencing the structures of our country in these very direct ways have very important stories to tell us. So thank you so much, Raymond. And I wonder, Chuck, you know, you live in proximity. Raymond lives in the Bay Area near you. You grew up there. How does Raymond's story resonate with you in his words?
Yeah. You know, I really, want to sort of acknowledge the work that Raymond, that you have done. And really, I mean, I think through you, I've also have a better understanding of the struggles of the, of our alumni, of different ethnic groups, including African Americans. So I really wanted to thank you. And we've known each other for many years as leaders of the Berkeley Alumni Association. So, we were talking about like, wow, we counted together, it's like almost a decade, which is scary, man. So, but, really wanted to acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge, Malia, the things that you actually were a great setup, by the way, about, some of these historical contexts. I think it was right on. So I actually also have more data points that I wanted to share. Thanks to my team, thanks to John for actually helping me to do some research. And I wanted to share some data points with you guys all, which I think may be interesting for you guys to reflect upon. But let me just share the slides. But anyways, so the first slide, can you guys all see? Right, you guys are gonna see there. Okay, so anyways, the first slide is talking about the demographics of the Chinese American population in California. And probably a few of you guys may or may not be aware of that. Actually, back in the 1860s, the Chinese population was actually close to 10%. It was actually 35,000 out of a total California population of 380,000. So that's like, 9.2%. And then that number continued to increase in terms of absolute number until like 1880. That was almost also 9%. It's like 75,000 strong out of a population of California population of 864. And then what happened? Actually, and then the Chinese Exclusion Act happened, which, by the way, is the first ever law ever passed against any one ethnic group in the US history, right? It's a shame because you look at that. With that law passing, 10 years later, the Chinese population remained the same, which is 76,000, no change whatsoever, right? And in fact, in proportion to the increases of California and also the increases of US population, it's actually going backward. So that's an interesting thing that, it's these are sort of the dark history and discriminations at our nation, including California, we thought, has been, with issues of such. And then additionally, the transcontinental railway, there's about 15,000 total Chinese workers who work on it. But believe it or not, about a third of the people actually who work on it die. They die from it, 4,000 people. 4,000 people, that is horrendous. That amount of deaths, relating to this kind of work. And part of the reason why there's so many people die was, poor conditions. These people were living in very poor conditions. Additionally, they were the ones who were asked to use dynamite to bomb up all the rock, all the tunnels, if you will, and you know how dangerous those things were, right? So those are the issues. And yet, you look at that. Well, at the end, they were never given credit, and this is a classic picture of this, the transcontinental construction when it was completed, and you can see. Unfortunately, everybody is, there's no minorities represented, no Chinese, no Blacks, no whatsoever. Whoever work on the minorities, out. It's all so this is actually an issue in the history of the U.S. Is the media itself have only portrayed the story that they want to hear, which is the majority of the people want to hear. They don't want to hear about all the contributions that other minorities have done. And this is, in fact, the other last slide I want to share, which is really sort of like the discrimination, thanks to Raymond, sharing some of the things that discriminations that used against minorities, Chinese, and Blacks before the civil rights era. I mean, there's many, many violence and massacres that happened. A classic one was 1871. More than 30 Chinese were lynched in LA. And then, of course, we heard about Red Summers, and most recently, the 1920 Tucson Massacre, which is the Black Wall Street, in Oklahoma, where more than 300 Blacks were killed, right, in that massacre alone. I already mentioned, we really have lack of access to good jobs. All the dangerous jobs were given to minorities, given to Chinese. Obviously, segregations, right? The Chinese were restricted to their own school system. And obviously, the Blacks, Jim Crow laws everywhere, right, in the South. And then political suppression. I've also mentioned the Chinese Exclusion Act, but also Blacks were really kept away from voting, right, because of these grandfather clauses before, which kept them away from being, having voting rights, and et cetera, and et cetera. So I wanted to share these things because I think, these are important data points that I think that we need to understand. These are dark histories that we actually had, discriminations that are right in their face against minorities, against Blacks, against Chinese and Asians. Let me just kind of stop there.
Thank you, Chuck. What I noticed is that, we have so much historical knowledge, and it seems so distant in time, right? That we're estranged from it. We do, even if we know very well, the Black struggle right now, how do we connect it? Because to see the patterns, right? So these data points are extraordinarily important for us to see the repetitions, the patterns of history. What was interesting to me is that, maybe surprising to a few people, on number 2 in your last slide, you mentioned the lack of access to jobs. But I can hear the counter argument, Chuck, Asians are doctors, they're lawyers, right? They they have good jobs, right, Chuck? So what is your perspective as a Bay Area business person, and you know the entire kind of business ecosystem there? Could you give us some reflection on that?
Right. Thank you. Thank you for asking that very important question. This is actually sort of the narrative of the media, actually, if you will, actually what we now know the biased media in a way. Essentially, I kind of really, I mean, you guys have probably, I think a lot of you guys have heard of this model minority myth, right, for Asians. And really, it's really something that, the majority of, I mean, quote unquote, the media and the politician use as a way to as a wedge, if you will, to counter the, and have different minority groups to fight with each other, right? And so in a sense that when the majority think that, oh, like against like other minorities like blacks and Hispanics, say, hey, they would say, look at the Asians, man, they integrated so well, why can't you be them? Right, and then of course when it's in the majority's favor, they would say, oh, they would use different phrases and say, and different things like that. Let me give you a concrete example. I'm a leader at Berkeley, and now so Berkeley has a good representations of Asians and Asian Americans. Domestically, we have about 40%, close to 40%. We are the majority in terms of like the largest representation. And then at the same time, you take international into consideration. That's another 10 to 15% international. And the majority of the international populations are Indians and Chinese, right? And of course, they're doing their, I mean, it's important to have these international side because they pay full tuition and more. They pay about like 40,000. By tuition to subsidize, which as a California, I mean, thanks to their efforts to subsidize the the education of some of underprivileged folks and disadvantaged folks in the state of California. But in essence, you have like a huge, I mean, close to 50%. Now, let me kind of raise the issue. I mean, of course, I'm very honored that we actually have first woman chancellor ever at Berkeley. But still, if you look at the executive level, meaning the vice chancellor and above, at Berkeley, as an example, let me just give you a very concrete example. A lot of Asian Americans are professors at Berkeley, by the way. But a lot of the populations are Asian Americans and Asian Americans, right? Combine that like 50%. Yet, if you look at vice chancellors and above, I'm sorry to say, right now there's really no minorities. I mean, there's really no minorities. It's all it's all one race. I mean, no minorities represented at Berkeley alone. So you can see these are issues that we're facing, right? And let me give you another concrete example. I have many friends. I have many friends at Google, for instance, and the narrative is this. I mean, the Asians are easily hired as engineers, but they're actually the least likely to be promoted at companies like Google, for instance, right? So those are the issues that there are subtleties. I mean, people say, oh, you guys are successful in Silicon Valley. Well, you're successful as workers. And these are the subtleties of discriminations that we're seeing, even in Silicon Valley. Terry.
Thank you, Chuck. So just to put it into context for people, what we're saying is that sometimes, a law or, you could be given a job, a technical thing, right? But does it give you recognition and power in society, right? And that I think goes for, that's shown in the Asian community in a different way from the Black community, but it is part of the entire system. And then we have to also say, Chuck, like, we're very happy that you're so successful, but this kind of, and movies like Crazy Rich Asians probably don't help. But the reality, the economic reality for Asians is that it's a bimodal. There's two humps, right? If we look at the distribution, there's very, very poor Asians, and they're the ones most affected in the pandemic. And Asians actually as a group are more likely to be in poverty than whites. Yeah. So we just have to overcome, and history helps us, personal history helps us overcome these mythologies to get to the point that we can actually understand what the true struggles of each other are. I saw Raymond wanted to mention something.
Yeah, I wanted to share. I wanted to share the felony arrest record for Oakland. Do I have a?
Please.
Oh yes, please.
Somebody into it.
So you can see this is the felony arrest record for Oakland in 2017.
Yep.
And if you look at it, communities of color are the predominant ones that have been arrested in 2018. And this is during the so-called era of justice and reform. And so I bring this to your attention to show you that the struggle is not over. Right. You know, we talk about mass incarceration, we have all these programs, we're funding these programs, but on the other end, business as usual. Mm-hmm. And this precludes you from getting jobs, you know, because jobs ask you now, have you ever been arrested? Right. So if you've been arrested for a felony, you know, I think they use computers now to sift through applications. And so you don't even get a chance to get an interview. So I just wanted to show people this, that the struggle is not over. And it's my hope that we come together and in order to kind of ameliorate these kind of trends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond. And we will be having, if it was not made clear by the invitation, we will be doing specific targeted, you know, additional sessions with some of our experts and other people that we will bring in on topics like, you know, incarceration, education, and also positive ones like arts and culture. So we hope that you join us in the future. I'm now going to, thank you again, Chuck, for your comments and your slides. I want to turn it to Kareem. Kareem, we think of politics as national, but really all of politics and social justice is local. Can you talk about the local conditions in Cleveland that people out there listening may not be aware of? And why did it make you devote your time and your life to building the Black Lives Matters Cleveland and to be an activist at this point in time in history?
Sure, and thank you. So first, before I actually say that, I just want to speak to Juneteenth real quick, and just to say this, that what the celebration for many of us that acknowledge and celebrate Juneteenth is about, and it's very relevant to why we're compelled to do this work, is that none of us are free until we're all free. And so that is the significance of Juneteenth, when the last of the folks who were to be emancipated were actually emancipated. And so then any time before that is not worthy of celebration. So, and that mindset, that rationale is what, you know, leads me to this. So, you know, to the question, what I'm asked to speak upon, you know, here in Cleveland is just that, you know, understanding that when you have a system, a carceral system, a system that makes sure that, you know, folks that are poor remain poor. Folks that are poor are the ones who are the most victimized and will not achieve very little to no victories, trying to maneuver within, you know, our criminal justice system. You know, that system created a very defeated group of people here in the city of Cleveland, not just among, you know, Black people, not just among brown people and so forth, among everybody. You go around the city, you find out that there are a lot of people who do not believe in the system, so therefore they don't vote, they don't engage. And a lot of that is tied in when you've been victimized by the system, when you've really tried to exercise your vote, and you saw that regardless of, you know, everything that you've done and what you know should have happened, those things didn't happen because you had a system and folks within a system more involved in helping themselves. And so, you know, you have to understand that system. So folks are very, very reluctant to get engaged. I found myself after the murders of Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams, 137 shots incident is what we often refer to. And when I say 137 shots, we're talking, it's basically, and the 137 shots, keep in mind, is the minimum. Because when they talked about that, we're talking about two people who were in a car that police said were eluding them. They were not eluding them at some high rate of speed. the person driving just did not stop. When that car stopped, when it was cornered, officers unloaded a barrage of gunfire upon that car. And they say at least 137 shots were fired at and went through that vehicle and those persons in that vehicle. And bear in mind, only one person was driving. So why did the passenger, not saying that the driver deserved to die, but why did even the passenger not have an opportunity, to escape with their life? That particular incident is what compelled me to come out. And of course, the murder of Tamir Rice. And so those are the things that made me come off of the couch. And, unfortunately, when you live in the defeated city, as I mentioned, that we have here, it's hard to get folks to come out in numbers and really try to give folks something to look at, our elected officials and so forth. And so we had to strategize and just figure out ways to get folks engaged and start affecting people's jobs politically at these administrations. And so by, disrupting things, by getting the media's attention, that's how we were able to affect things. So when you see folks holding up an intersection, it's more to it than that. Please know that, I wanted to say, it's, and those things are strategic because when there is disruption, folks have to answer for it. The folks that have some influence are like, why are these people upset? It's disrupting my day. So now our problem becomes their problem. Their problem now becomes the problem of these elected officials. And if these elected officials, these people in these administrations want to keep their jobs, they're going to do what they can to stop upsetting people and stop drawing this kind of negative attention. So those are some of the rationales behind what we do. But we do try to affect how people vote. We do try, to disrupt in those ways and more, to try to influence our elected officials to do the right things. But I wanted to, before I end, I wanted to mention two things. And, one is, I wanted to mention that, what we have going on here is new to us in this particular time, but it is not new. These are things that people like Fred Hampton embarked upon, many years ago as a part of the Black Panther Party. And he brought all of us together, and more. And he was very effective at it. And it is, in fact, what got him killed by the state. He was murdered by the state. And, with what I opened with about none of us are free until we're all free, that is essentially why we're here. That is why I'm here. That is why I so identify with June Wang, who was murdered here in Ohio. And, reaching out to and talking with his sister, Julia, yes, he's Asian. Yes, he's Chinese, but I identify with that because I'm beyond, just as many of us are. We are beyond just looking at our silo, our particular individual demographic or race that we identify with. I identify with being victimized by law enforcement and not cared about by our society, that when I see the murder and learn of the murder and know of the murder of June Wang could be a relative of mine. That June Wang can be me. And so that's what I mean. And so I'm hoping that when you see something happen, that you want to become engaged, whether it's from a group that you identify with or not. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And we need to stand together and make that change. Thanks.
Hey, Karina, I just want to acknowledge that word that you said. I think that's awesome because I think that's so meaningful because fundamentally, aside from the ethnics and the color of our skin, we're all human beings. So well said. Thank you for sharing that.
Kareem, I just wanted to provide some context for people who don't know these cases that Kareem has so eloquently spoken about. Timothy and Melissa were two Black Clevelanders. They were driving in their car that backfired by the Justice Center, which is near the police station. The police mistook it as a gunshot and pursued them through, I don't know how many neighborhoods in Cleveland at full speed, surrounded them in a parking lot of a school. And one of the police officers proceeded to get onto the hood of Timothy and Melissa's car and continue shooting them. But unfortunately, none of these cops were criminally found guilty. And Kareem, it's only through my friendship with Kareem that I know about Jung Wong. And I see that his sister has entered our meeting, so welcome, Julia. Jung Wong was the brother of Julia, and he was killed in her home by North Royalton police that was trying to enforce a probate order for mental health. So how does a probate order for a person in mental distress turn into 2 shots fired in him? And even though he had 2 gunshot wounds, an ambulance did not come for 30 minutes to help him. So the concept of compassion and care is so connected to the direct treatment of force there. So, and when we often think that Asian Americans, right, just probably because the statistics are not taken, don't seem to be impacted in these ways by the law enforcement system and the carceral system, but Raymond and Kareem have told us otherwise. And it does give us the real kind of concrete evidence that we should be working together. We are going to now hear from Charleston Wong, but before then, we'd like to give you some archival footage from Detroit in 1982. We emphasize this was in 1982. Vincent Chin was murdered by 2 white auto workers. His head was beaten with a baseball bat, and the auto workers pled guilty to manslaughter because it was witness and plainly clear, but they served no jail time and paid $3,750, which were the court costs. So in 1982, we still live in a country where an Asian life was not given the same consideration, and loss of an Asian life was not given the same consideration as we need as in a society. So John, if you can play, this is really important, these are archival footage from Detroit. Detroit, just to give you background, is a very multiracial city too. So you will see many African Americans, Black Americans enter as pivotal people that helped at least Vincent Chin find some form of justice.
The jukebox was sitting here. Back here, you can see the mirror and the lockers where they would get ready for their dance. Generally, the girls would perform 3 dances, the first one in their outfit, and the last 2 had to be topless.
You just don't walk away after you've killed a man. I don't care for what reason, whether it was a drunken brawl or whether it was for racial means or whatever. You just don't absolutely go and beat a man to death with a baseball bat.
During the noon hours, it was a big time for businessmen, usually white males, 3-piece suits, nice cars, pull in here, and they're usually by themselves. The evening hours would draw more of the 1 and 2, a couple guys type come in, the factory workers and things, but primarily it was just one John would come at a time.
Dip, 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 boom. Sha-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na. Oh, yip, 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 mum, 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 mum. Get a job. Sha-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na. Oh, when I get up, I'll get it, and my girl has learned to say, if there is any work for me.
There was a table in front of the booth, and the girl would come into the booth with them and service them by either giving them a lap dance or a hand job.
The next thing I know, while the other girls out dancing, we hear boom, 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 and we run to the stage to see what's happening. She's coming off the stage. We go, what's up? And we look out, and I see guys are fighting out there in the club.
I was walking down the street from my girlfriend's house, and I seen some guys across the street over there. And, you know, one guy, older guy, was checking the young guy's head, you know, because blood was running down his face. And I went over to see if they needed any help. They said they needed some help, and they was going to offer me $20 to catch these Chinese guys that they got into it with. So I said, okay. I said, do y'all want to go to the hospital? Because it was right around the corner. So we got into their car. The father was saying, you know, when we catch up with these Chinese guys, we're going to bust their motherfucking heads like that. And as we got up to McDonald's, the father seen the two Chinese guys sitting down. And I told them that the police was there. They said, fuck the police.
At which time they jumped out, and it kind of shocked me. And because it's a predominantly 90% black neighborhood, and to see a male white get out of a car with a baseball bat, the first thing I was thinking that maybe it was coming from the Tiger Stadium baseball game.
Mr. Evans and Mr. Nitz jumped out from behind the truck, attempted to grab Vincent Chin, who they cornered up in the phone booth here.
Mr. Nitz had to grab Mr. Vincent Chin in a bear hug, while Mr. Evans swung a bat, repeatedly striking Mr. Chin.
Evidently, Mr. Chin broke loose. He ran out here to the middle of the street, and he stopped. He slipped. Mr. Evans was standing over him with a baseball bat. He had it with both hands, and he was hitting him in the top of his head.
He swung the bat as if a baseball player was swinging for a home run.
So the second video is of Lily Chen, Vincent's mother.
You know how they killed my son.
This much is
One person,
on June
the son
19,
hold him up.
1982.
Held him.
Yeah, hold him
The
up.
son held him, yes.
The father hit him
Yes, ma'am.
the head. Kill my son, looks like it killed the animal like that.
Neitz and Ebens were both charged with killing Vincent Chin. I spoke with some of his...
Wow. You know, when I just, I don't know about the rest of you, but I tear up when I see his mother speak. And we have to remember that we remember Vincent as a civil rights hero, but she lost a son. So Charleston, I look at this footage, and although there's so many eyewitnesses, if not for the work of advocates like yourself, I wonder what would have happened to Vincent's story. Would he have just been another Asian American man that died? And apparently the consequence was a $3,000 fine. So I would like to know what drove you to help Vincent, and can you please tell us, you know, the archival footage is great, but could you fill in a few more details briefly about what happened that night to give others who have who are new to the story?
Yes, I will give you this. I tear up every time when I see Lily Chen also, and it brings back very hard memories. These were, I lived through these, that 80s with Vincent Chin. Vincent Chin was scheduled to be married. It was his bachelor's party. 3 of his friends, men friends, took him to this adult entertainment bar to celebrate his bachelor's party night out. And I'll just tell you very frankly, brutally frankly, what I think the issue was. Here was this Chinese person, and they were watching a white stripper dance. Her name was Racine Caldwell. And there were some remarks about this woman, this lady, and Ronald Ebens and his son was across the catwalk. And they didn't like Vincent Chin enjoying this lady dancing. And Racine Caldwell testified. She heard everything. She said, these 2 white men said to Vincent Chin, it's because of you little motherfuckers that we, they were auto workers, are out of work. And Vincent, being macho young man, he didn't like being called that name. He went out over across to the other side, and said, "I'm not a little motherfucker," all right? And before you know it, punches, it got physical. And in that initiation fight, these two white men found themselves on their backs, sitting on the ground. Vincent decked them. Okay, that's a fact. And with that happening, the bouncers came and threw Vincent out of the bar, and all his friends, his three friends, one Chinese guy and two white men, his friends. And the father, the son was bleeding, the white son, man's stepson, and he was hurt. And they went out too. And that's the witness say there are two guys with the man bleeding in his head. And they saw Vincent in the parking lot and they wanted to continue the fight. And Vincent says, "Okay, I'll fight you." And the father went to the car, the trunk of his car, and brought out, this is a baseball bat, and came to Vincent Chin. And Vincent, I'm not going to fight you with a baseball bat. I'm going to run. So he ran. All his friends scattered. His mistake was they ran across the McDonald's. They sat down on the bench in the parking lot. And as you know, Ron Liebens, the father and the stepson, drove around and found him sitting there. And they came out, and the son rushed out to Vincent. Vincent tried to run. The son grabbed him in a bear hug and held him. And the father, and this is a baseball bat. And it's not a gun, but that was enough. Vincent struck out, ran, and fell again, and the father hit him more times, cracking open his head. That's a sound you would hear if you were there. And basically spilled his brains on the pavement. He never recovered he was semi-conscious. There are stories, there are videos of the EMT talking about the injury. And 4 days later, they pulled the plug on him. It was brain dead. So that is the murder because of you little motherfuckers. We, good people of Detroit, the auto workers are out of work. And Vincent Chin wasn't even Japanese. In those days, it was Toyotas and Hondas. He was a Chinese American young man trying to live the American life, going to a strip joint for his bachelor's party. And he died. And the judge, the Detroit judge, the state judge, say, "Oh, these are not the people that I can send to jail." You've heard that before. We don't make the penalty fit the crime, but we make it fit the criminal. And these are good men. I cannot send them to jail. $3,000 paid over 3 years and 3 years probation. Nearly $100 a month, something like that. That was the end of the state prosecution for second-degree murder, reduced plea bargain down to manslaughter. And with that, everybody, the Asian American, out of fear, sheer fear of the lack of protection and outrage, and the mother, Lily Chan, was the heroine. She took up the cause in her Cantonese English language, Cantonese Chinese, went all over the country. And people like Jesse Jackson and even State Representative John Conyers, Congressman, US Congress, who was beholden to the UAW for his vote, okay? They all came together and went to the Justice Department, but primarily to the Asian American community with the support of African American and the press, Detroit press, convinced the United States government to charge Vincent Chin with violating the civil rights, preventing him from enjoying the public accommodations. There was no injury civil rights like passed later by President Obama. And there was federal trial, and the jury found the father guilty of violating civil rights, of killing Vincent Chin. When you deprive a man of his life, that's the ultimate violation of his civil rights. All right. And the judge, the first African-American judge who was in the federal court there in Detroit, in Michigan, judge must remember her, Anna Diggs Taylor, promptly sentenced the father, the convicted father, 25 years in prison. And by the way, the officer in the uniform, that officer's name was Morris Cotton. And Officer Cotton later rose to become the police chief of the city of Highland Parks, where the murder occurred. Kudos to him. And but Vincent Chin's lawyers appealed to the Sixth Circuit, which is here based in Cincinnati. And two major arguments were raised. The one I'll expound on, spend the lots of little details, but the key fact, or one key issue challenging the conviction was that the federal civil rights laws that was brought against the father, the stepfather, the baseball killer, did not protect Orientals. That the law only protected African Americans, going back to the 13th, 14th, the holy trinity of the civil rights amendments, right? That the Civil War was fought over Black slaves and Asians, the Orientals. Today I'll cringe someone called me Oriental, but it was in 1982. It was discussed in the legal brief. The Orientals were not protected. The Sixth Circuit disagreed. The Sixth Circuit said, no way. The civil rights laws protect Asian Americans as well as Black people, as well as all people from racial discrimination. So that was a landmark case that came out, holding that came out of Vincent Chin. And to this day, it is cited as authority that Asians are protected. From that point on, there's no question that the Oriental is protected under our civil rights laws. This is important because I think Raymond spoke about, and Kareem too, about equal protection. There's a little Chinese schoolgirl in the 1920s who filed suit to say, I have a right to go to public schools. And it went up to Supreme Court, it's Dong Lam, case of Dong Lam. And the Supreme Court says, yeah, you as an Asian has a right, Chinese girl has a right to go to public schools, but you go to the segregated schools with the Black folks. You cannot go to our white schools. This is Jim Crow. The Chinese schoolgirl was a victim of Jim Crow by the, like Ferguson, the coach case, Ferguson case in the 1880s. Separate but equal is fine, Jim Crow. And the other case I want to for folks in California, People versus Hall. In the 1800s, in the days of the railroads, California passed a law saying Blacks and mulattoes. Mulatto is a derogatory term. We cannot use it anymore, but this is historical fact. It's a mule, okay? A mule is a mixed race animal. So ergo mulatto. It refers to Black, mixed race, Black people with Latinos, with Native Americans, the mulattoes, cannot testify against a white man in California court. And a Chinese person was a victim and he wanted to testify of a white crime. And the California courts and People versus Hall said, no, you yellow people, the Asians, fall within the Black and mulatto prohibition. You shall not testify against the white man in a court in a criminal case in California. So the Asians have been, no matter what our modern day Asian people, all you young people out there, you may think you're white. Are you white? Well, the courts have historically held that the yellow man, woman is not white. It's like the Black and the mulatto, and specifically in California, People versus Hall. So this is the dilemma that Vincent Chin cleared up, that this young man enjoying a strip joint, it's a public place of accommodation, cannot be killed because of his race, because of you little motherfuckers were out of work, you nips, you chink. These words are all tossed inside the barroom, and the stripper Racing Crowell testified to it. However, the Sixth Circuit reversed on technical reasons, a lot of other technical reasons. One, not removing the case out of Detroit because of this. And it was reversed and he was given a new trial. And the judge, having been slapped down or admonished by the Sixth Circuit, says, all right, I'm done with it. She sent it down to Cincinnati, Ohio. That's when it came to my city in '87, and I was involved in raising the public awareness of this travesty. unfortunately, Powell and Travesty, our Cincinnati jury acquitted the father. And they're acquitted, but they're guilty of manslaughter in Detroit, in Michigan law. They're convicted killers, but they never served any time in jail.
Yes, so I think what we see is that there was no dispute about the manslaughter, but the judge had such flexibility, and we hear this like, that's not the type of person you throw in jail, this type of reason given for leniency for a very clear-cut case.
And I'll give you one more last insight on this. The Cincinnati jury, in my opinion, I observed this up front, did not believe the testimony of Rexine Caldwell, who was a key witness about the racial words being tossed against Vincent Chin. The civil rights case, they have to prove racial motivation. And our Cincinnati jury, Cincinnati is a very conservative city in Ohio, probably most conservative compared to Cleveland across the state. And our standing wisdom is, we are a clean city. We have no strippers, no sex industry. If you want to find a sexual entertainment, you go across the river into Kentucky, okay? Women, fast women, and fast horses and whatever. And anyway, all that kind of stuff is across the river. You go to Newport, Kentucky. And also, the jury has very little experience with Asian Americans in this city at that time. And basically, they could not send this baseball killer to jail, and they acquitted him. So the sexual innuendos and sexual atmosphere of this case is very strong. So, and this is a gender issue where women that are marginalized, their testimony not given weight. And it's tragic. Yes, we'll discuss it later. Too emotionally, I thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're so knowledgeable, and we welcome people that are interested more in the case to participate in a breakout session with Charleston. We see that we have this new common word, intersectionality, but it was all of history's injustices were intersectional in this country. Malia, so what I hear in Charleston's story, maybe by the very virtue of the fact that it was in a Detroit, a city that before the decline in the auto industry was heavily African American. We see, and it was in a Black neighborhood, we see a lot of African American, Black Americans serving as key witnesses and key and pivotal, because I can imagine what would have happened if there were no witnesses. What would have happened to Vincent's story and his death?
The two Black officers arrested him on the spot with the baseball bat in his hand. They committed murder.
Right. So is this, Malia, do you think that this is just something that happens, that you can see people across races using their power in very kind of exigent, demanding things like a murder, right? I would hope all of us would intercede. Do you have some insight from history about how power is used across racial communities? And because we have a common narrative right now, unfortunately, in the media that, we can only help our own community, people who look like us. So, but what does history say to us?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Charleston. That was a really powerful reflection. And thank you for all the work that you've done, and also for, Raymond and Chuck and for Kareem and everybody who's really worked to create justice in our own communities. We said that reflecting on history helps us to reflect on our current day situation and where we want to go forward. And to answer your question, Terry, yes, like this is the history of the United States, that, we're 156 years out of the end of slavery in the United States and the beginning of celebration of freedom. And in those early years, you have a group of activists, interracial activists, who come together, who want to make this a real democracy. And they're the ones who get this 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, who get our rights enshrined in law. But as we know, many people, they had hate in their heart. They didn't care what the law says. And so then another 70 years later, you have what's called the Civil Rights Movement, or the Second Reconstruction, where you have groups of activists in multiple communities come together in the rights conscious era to get things like the passage of the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act passed, right? And yet our struggle still is not done. And so I think that now is the time to reflect on 156 years after the end of slavery, 37 years after the death of Vincent Chin, a year after the murder of George Floyd, how will those of us today step forward and start to build coalitions to take us to the next step in our nation's history?
Thank you so much, Malia. So before we go into our breakout sessions, I did want to ask one final question of all our panelists. Since we are running a little over time, if you can keep it as brief as possible, we would appreciate it. So my question to you is, hearing all these stories, some may be unknown to you, some may sound very familiar to your own life. What do you commit now in your individual life to bring about solidarity and effectiveness between the Black and Asian communities? So whoever wants to go first can jump in.
I'll give you this. I'm a old man, okay? Martin Luther King is still alive in my heart. Dr. MLK said this, and this is something we may not remember too well, but only love can drive out hate. And he said also, we must not worship the God of hate, and we must not bow to the altar of retaliation. And this is the key of Martin Luther King's message. Do not retaliate. Do not return violence with violence, but fight violence with nonviolence, fight injustice with justice, illness with compassion, and alienation of community. And he died 1 year after he spoke out against the Vietnam War. He could not bear to see the United States kill Vietnamese people thousands of miles away, and he offended the status quo. He was politically incorrect. 1 year later, he was assassinated. He began also advocating for labor rights. In Memphis, he was going to speak for the sanitation workers. A lot of them are African Americans, but they're white sanitation workers also, okay? To this day, they are. And he crossed over advocating for African Americans to advocating for labor and Asian Americans, and that was too much for this country. They killed him.
Hey, well said, Charleston. I think one of the things that Wayman and I plan to do, by the way, we're going to be in October. Berkeley has a homecoming. So this is actually a series of events that we're going to do, including the homecoming, including actually we're going to have some dialogues between the students, such as some of the student leaders here, as well as college leaders and whatnot. So we wanted to, this is sort of the beginning of a series of dialogue, which we actually want to continue. But Wayman, your thoughts?
I just want to say in regards to Vincent Chin, it resonated with me, and I think this is the importance of having information like this. It resonated with me in a different way. It looked like, Vincent Chin probably kicked their asses, and to me, they went out and beat him up. But it sent a message which has been a message for the last 400 years for Black folks, is that you can't raise your hands against white people. And so like this whole event with Vincent Chin has really kind of it reminded me of I've experienced Jim Crow. I was 6 years old in 1961 in a place called Edwardsville, Virginia, and Jim Crow was still in effect. We still had colored and white bathrooms. And so, I mean, it just like took me back. The Vincent Chin story just took me back. And I think it's important that we continue to share information and our lived experiences, that we have shared lived experiences, and we need to use them as focal points to continue the dialogue and continue the conversation. Thank you.
So Kareem, are you still on?
Yes. So, as far as like my takeaways and so forth, after learning what I've learned, there are things already that, we've been putting into practice as far as just how we show our empathy, how we show our solidarity. But really, I think that my single biggest takeaway, really is to, around these incidents, around these specific actions, I really feel that we have to become, and I have to make a conscious effort to really inject myself into these certain circles, so that not only that I can become, perhaps a source, a networking tool, a way, a means in which I can really help some of these affected individuals, their families, these orgs, but also, just to view these people, these organizations as a means for which I could achieve something, like in collaboration, like for all of us. You know what I mean? Like basically, and what I'm saying is like listening, to Chuck, um, like I'm I'm quite impressed. I'll just say that. And I would love to be networked with someone like that. Just not always, we see the traditional folks on TV, in the media, on social media, but I didn't know who Chuck was until I got involved with this. He's someone that I want to know. And I just think that, they don't want us to come together. They don't want us to know each other. They don't want us to be in community with each other. And I want to change that. I want to change that at every turn, at every opportunity that I can, because we're stronger together.
Well said. Well said, Kareem. Hey,
Let me add, please, that Black Lives Matter.
Oh, go ahead, Charles.
Black Lives Matter because people still behave differently based on their perception of race. As long as there are people who do that, Black lives will matter.
Right. Well said. Well said. I think, Terry, in the interest of time, let's do the breakout room real quickly. I think that we're running behind in terms of time. I suggest we do a short breakout session, maybe for about 10 minutes, and then we come back to in closing. So probably I know that people probably are rushed for time. It is longer than we expect, but obviously for good reasons. I think we have really a lot of very meaningful contents. But we do want to do a really breakout session. So let's do this. Serena, let's create those breakout sessions. We have 2. So people can sign on to those 2 right now after we speak for 10 minutes. And then we have a closing. So in 10 minutes later, we'll do a final closing. Yeah.
Right, Serena, the breakout sessions will be Chuck and Raymond, and then the other one will be me, Malia, Charleston, and Kareem. It may look geographical, I know, to a lot of you, but if there's different issues, I think that are local. So if you would like to find out, or if you just find resonance with whatever someone has said, please enter our breakout session. So, and we will come back with a little, I do encourage you to do the breakout session and also come back. We have a special poem by an Asian American poet to share with you. I just have to say, I'm just so glad that everyone's still on this Zoom. So I think we've just in our sharing, I think we have shown how much we have in common. Everybody's so engaged. So I'm so happy to see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Serena, do the breakouts?
Yeah, let's do the breakout. And Terry, I'm going to ask you to moderate that thing so that we can be first short and crisp to when people are in the breakout room, so we can have time to just talk real quick. Okay, great. I'll see you guys in the breakout room.
while we wait, Raymond, I would love to see you create a short article that we could put in club newsletters like the DC Cal newsletter. It would be great to be able to highlight the underground scholars and inform people. I'm sure they wouldn't know here on the East Coast about it.
Okay, great. I'll hit me up.
Chuck knows how to find me.
Okay, I don't have a Twitter account.
That's okay. Just a little personal account. It would be nice. More of us from the club hope to join, but they had a lot of commitment. And I know Chuck has promised me that the recording will be shared. So hopefully it's something I can bring to the Cal board and share.
Yeah, Kathy, well said. Well said. And Raymond, do the same for the other chapters too, so we know about it, right?
Okay. All right, absolutely.
Right. So
much. I hope your breakout rooms were as fruitful as ours. I just shared 2 things in the chat box. As my commitment, as I mentioned, we had the 3 values at the beginning that comes from a language model called nonviolent communication. And, and we hear all these values from that sheet that we looked at before reflected either positively or negatively in negation as our core needs. So this is I think this is a person that's well known to San Francisco. I've seen him do a lot of workshops. He's unfortunately passed, Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. And it is a practical model to talk to people who are different from you. I think we all could use that, and there are going to be, and to realize that people come into a conversation with what they have in their entire life in that day, and to recognize that it's not personal, and we're all looking for the same thing. So in that vein, we would like to close with a poem. I chose this poem. It's a poem by Janice Murikatani, who is very well known to San Francisco people. She is the 2nd poet laureate of San Francisco. She is also a sansei, which means 3rd generation Japanese American poet. Her family was in the internment camps. And I chose this poem because after Vincent's death, Vincent's mother, Lily Chen, who we saw in that brief clip, but powerful clip, stated that she not only had lost a son, Vincent, but also a daughter, the daughter-in-law that she never got to include in her family. And by the way, Lily Chen eventually moved away from this country after the injustice that she had suffered because she could no longer endure a society that treated her son, her dying son, in this way. But I believe that Janice's poem will give us hope and a path forward. She's going to explain at the beginning what inspired her poem. So let's listen. Thank you.
So I was presented with a box when I did a reading in Stockton several years ago, and the box had the name Mirikitani written on it. And it was apparently during the war when we were thrown into the camps, it was apparently like kept by a Japanese American family who kept it for us and passed it on to the next people who purchased their home, and they kept it. And then the students presented me in Stockton with this box. And I was speechless I was speechless. He doesn't believe that I never was speechless. But it was an amazing gift, and the box contained these precious pieces of china, bowls and cups and teacups of my grandmother. And it was so meaningful. And of course, my daughter will get these possessions when I'm gone, and she will pass them on to her son. But this is entitled "Letter to My Daughter." What is it about this day of remembrance, my daughter? This day that we've discovered the teacups of my grandmother, hastily left behind when they were rushed to concentration camps in Arkansas. I think of all your grandmother and her mother have left behind for us, within us, our dignity, our history, a love that rises. Sorry, I'm going in for cataract surgery in a couple of days. You can see why. A love that rises from the buried box, from the desert sand, from the ashes of our stolen past. I am moved to tell you about this love that prevailed through imprisonment and shame, self-hatred, loneliness, and self-blame. This love overturned injustice in the courts for redress, plowed once more the ground, the ground that was laid waste by the government. And from these brambles and weeds grew trees of gold pears and tomatoes bursting with seed. I am moved to tell you the stories of women who sang even in desert dust and swamp heat, that dulled the shine on their skin, imprisoned for expediency. My daughter, I want to tell you that my grandmother would fill cups with tea after a day's work and tell me how my eyes contained light that would illumine my possibilities. It matters not what they say about us, she said. All that comes before us dwells within us. All that comes hereafter is legacy. From the phosphorescence of our bodies, we are ignited by touch. We are rekindled by the breath of memory, the movement around us, the stirring for justice, the need for you, our children, to continue. Remember the stories we write on our skin, luminous with light that shines from within, and we will find one another again and again. Remember this, to love in yourself what the Spirit has gifted, and all that comes before and all that comes hereafter, all of it, all of it. Thank you.
So thank you so much. That was very powerful words from Janice, and I take that to mean that all the things, the struggles that we've been through, the fact that we are here to talk about it is a tremendous triumph that we can all be here today. So I thank you so much. I don't know if Chuck has any other closing thoughts.
Yeah, I just want one really quick thing. I know a lot of you guys have asked about the recording because I know certain people may not be able to join. So Serena, so I'm gonna ask you once you're done, post it on the Instagram that BCA Instagram and Facebook. I guess we have those things. So we're just gonna put up there the link when it's available. So.
Thank you so much, and we welcome you to our future dialogues. And if you have ideas of topics that you would like to talk to, if you would like to participate in a different way or know of somebody that would be a great panelist, please let us know. And please connect with BCAIA and APAPA and Black Lives Matters in your local communities. Thank you so much again.
Yes. Good day and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.